The coffin jammed halfway down. Ropes shrieked. Wood cracked. Someone swore under their breath. I remember thinking how obscene it was that even the ground rejected him. Snow drifted into the open grave, melting on the cheap pine lid. 8 years old, 48 inches of ruined future. I stood alone while the funeral director barked instructions and 2 men strained to free what shouldn't have been stuck in the first place. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Again and again. I didn't look. I already knew who it was and why they hadn't come. Because while my son was being lowered into frozen Illinois dirt, my family was sitting in a glass office downtown, signing papers that would decide who got rich from his death. They thought I'd never find out. They were wrong. 3 weeks earlier, I still believed grief had limits. My name is Claire Holloway. I'm 34. Freelance designer. Widow. Orphan maker, if you want to be cruel about it. My husband died first, hit by a drunk driver on I-90. I survived that by going numb. Our son, Evan, survived it by trusting the world anyway. Until the hospital called at 2:17 a.m. The day of the funeral, the cold was surgical, clean, merciless. I kept checking the rows of folding chairs, convinced my parents would slide in late, breathless with excuses. Traffic, sickness, anything, they never came. What did arrive was a florist van. The girl handed me a card, no names, just with love. The receipt stapled to the back told the truth. Ordered 2 weeks earlier. They knew the date, they knew the time. They just chose not to be there. After the service, an older man waited for me by the iron gate. Black coat, lawyer posture. "Miss Holloway," he said gently, "I manage the trust your in-laws set up for Evan." That was the first time anyone said the word trust out loud. $860,000. Locked, protected. Not mine. Never was. A lot of people start asking questions after funerals, he warned. Some people grieve. Some people calculate. That night, my phone finally stopped vibrating long enough for one message to land cleanly. From my mother. "We need to talk about the money." I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinet where Evan's cereal still sat unopened, and understood something all at once. They didn't miss the funeral. They skipped it. And whatever they were planning next was already in motion. They came the next morning. No warning, no call first. Just a knock, soft, careful, rehearsed. The kind you use when you want to look like the good guy later. My mother stood on the porch with a foil-covered casserole. My father hovered behind her holding grocery bags like props. Grief cosplay. "Claire," my mother whispered, folding me into a hug that smelled like her perfume. She cried hard enough to be convincing. I almost broke. Almost. Inside, they didn't sit right away. They looked. The couch Evan's grandparents bought, the framed prints, the quiet markers of money that never came from them. My father noticed everything. "We were so worried," my mother said. "You didn't answer last night." She didn't ask how I was. My father cleared his throat. "Did your husband's family leave you anything else? Insurance? Property?" There it was. Early, blunt, like ripping a bandage off skin that hadn't healed. My mother shot him a look, then squeezed my hand. "Sweetheart, we just want to help you think clearly. You've been through so much." Help. Their favorite word when they wanted control. They stayed exactly 47 minutes. Long enough to assess. Not long enough to mourn. When they left, the casserole went with them. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. My sister Lena, mascara streaked, arms open. She collapsed against me, sobbing like the floor had dropped out from under her. For a second, it felt real. She talked about Evan, his laugh, his dumb dinosaur phase. My chest ached, then she said it. "Well, at least you don't have to worry about college anymore." The room went silent. She realized too late. Tried to laugh it off. "I mean, you can focus on healing now." When she went to the bathroom, her phone lit up on the coffee table. I shouldn't have looked, I did. A message from our mother. "Did you ask about the lawyer yet?" Below it, a Zillow link, Craftsman House, wraparound porch. We can finally afford it. They'd already spent the money, my son's money. That night I couldn't sleep. I searched old emails, scrolled years back, 6 months before Evan died. From Lena, random question LOL, if something ever happened to Evan, what happens to the trust? My hands started shaking. Then I found the voicemail. 3 days before the funeral. Accidentally sent to me. My mother's voice, clear as glass. She'll cave, she always does. My father laughed softly. And if she doesn't? My mother. Then we go to plan B. I sat in the dark and understood something cold and final. They didn't just calculate after Evan died. They'd been planning before. And whatever plan B was, I was standing directly in its path. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and winter coats. Jonathan Pierce didn't rush me. That was the first thing I noticed. He let the silence stretch while I sat there gripping my purse like it might float away. When I told him about the voicemail, the email, the house listing, he didn't look shocked. He looked tired. "They're following a playbook," he said finally, "and it's not an amateur one." He explained the trust like a locked room I was standing guard outside of. I didn't own what was inside. I couldn't give it away even if I wanted to, but I could be pressured. And pressure was exactly what the trust was designed to expose. "Don't refuse them yet," he said. "If you do, they go nuclear, court filings, claims you're unstable. They'll paint you as a grieving mother who can't be trusted with money." My stomach dropped. "They already are." He nodded. Then we let them keep talking. That night, I called my mother back. I let my voice shake, let the exhaustion bleed through. "Maybe you're right," I said. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Can we talk this weekend?" Her relief was immediate, too fast. "I knew you'd come around," she said. "You always do the right thing." I recorded the call. Over the next 2 days, they called constantly. Advice disguised as concern. Warnings wrapped in love. My father mentioned court delays. Lena talked about how selfish it would look if I hoarded money meant for family. My mother cried about humiliation, about how people talk. Every call was another rope tightening. Friday morning, Pierce called me before I was even dressed. "They filed," he said. "Emergency motion." "About what?" "Your mental fitness. They're claiming you're incapable of managing financial responsibilities due to acute grief." I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dent Evan's body used to leave in the mattress when he climbed in during storms. "They have statements," Pierce continued, "from neighbors. Saying you don't sleep, don't eat, seemed attached." I knew exactly who. People who'd ask questions while pretending to bring soup. "They're trying to remove you as gatekeeper," he said. "If they succeed, the trust becomes vulnerable." Something inside me hardened, not snapped, set. "Then we move first," I said. By noon, we filed our own motion. Recordings, emails, screenshots. Lena's message from 6 months before, the voicemail. A letter from my therapist. A timeline that showed intent, not concern. That afternoon, my phone exploded. My mother screamed that I was destroying the family. My father said I'd regret this. Lena texted once, "I thought you were better than them." Saturday came anyway, not at my parents' house. At their lawyer's office. They'd brought witnesses. I walked in with Pierce and saw the setup instantly. Sympathy arranged in chairs, concern preloaded. They slid a document across the table. A compromise, they called it. 40%. A house. Evan's name on a plaque somewhere. Then they showed me the email, one I never wrote. Words full of spite. Hatred. Proof, they said, that I was acting out of vengeance, not obligation. The room leaned in, waiting for me to break. I didn't. That email was sent from my sister's Wi-Fi, I said quietly. Pierce placed the forensic report on the table. Silence cracked. My sister started crying. Real this time. The truth poured out fast after that. Passwords, pressure, promises. And when the letter from Evan's grandmother was read aloud, the one that said, "Deny them absolutely," my mother didn't cry. She went very still. In that moment I saw it clearly. They hadn't lost me. They'd never had me. They'd just mistaken my silence for permission. The hearing didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in a conference room with beige walls and bad coffee, presided over by a retired judge who'd seen every version of family greed there was. She listened without interrupting while Pierce laid everything out. Dates, calls, the voicemail, the forged email, the timing. 3 weeks before my son died, my parents had their first consultation with that lawyer. That detail changed the air in the room. My mother tried to explain it away. Coincidence. Planning ahead, being responsible. The judge didn't argue. She just asked questions and waited while my parents tangled themselves answering. When my sister was called to speak, she lasted less than 5 minutes. She admitted to the email, the password, the pressure. She said she thought it was temporary, just enough to scare me into agreeing. She kept saying she didn't think it would go this far. The judge asked her one question. "What did you think would happen to your sister if this worked?" My sister opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The ruling came fast. The undue influence clause was triggered. Permanently. My parents and my sister were barred from any claim related to the trust. The lawyer excused himself before it was finished. He didn't look at anyone on the way out. Outside, my mother followed me into the hall. "So that's it?" she asked. "You just erase us?" I looked at her hands. Empty. No casserole this time, no performance. "You erased yourselves," I said, "at the funeral." She flinched like I'd slapped her. Weeks passed. The house stayed quiet. The calls stopped. Word traveled the way it always does. Sideways, whispered. Invitations dried up. Church friends vanished. My parents didn't fight it. They couldn't without reopening everything. I met with Evan's aunt and the lawyer one last time to decide what to do with the money. We didn't keep it. We built something else. A fund, scholarships, counseling, kids who'd lost parents, kids who wouldn't get the future they were promised. On paper, it looked clean, resolved. But grief doesn't care about paperwork. On the anniversary, I went back to the cemetery. Alone this time, by choice. I knelt in the cold and told my son I'd kept him safe, that no one had taken anything from him. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. "You think this is over?" The number stayed blocked. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Whoever sent it wanted a reaction, fear, doubt, proof they still lived somewhere in my head. They were wrong. 2 days later, Pierce called. "They're testing boundaries," he said. "Once the trust was sealed, they lost leverage. All they have left is intimidation." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The first letter arrived the following week. No return address, typed, short. "You humiliated us." I burned it in the sink without reading it twice. Then came the second. People are asking questions. The third one was different. It included copies, old photos from my wedding, a picture of Evan at 5, holding his dinosaur backpack, photos I hadn't shared publicly. They still had access to parts of my life. That night, my bank flagged an attempted login from an unfamiliar device. Then my email, then my social media accounts one by one. Reset requests piling up like someone rattling every door to see which one opened. I changed everything. Passwords, 2-factor, new number. Still, something felt off. Pierce confirmed it the next morning. They hired a private investigator, he said. Not to get the money, to get dirt, anything that makes you look unstable, neglectful, unfit. For what? I asked. He paused. Revenge. That word landed heavier than I expected. The investigator didn't hide very well. A sedan parked across the street for hours at a time. A man pretending to check his phone while watching my front door. Once, I caught him photographing my trash. I let him. Every bag held exactly what it should. What I didn't expect was the call from Child Protective Services. Anonymous tip. Concern about my emotional state. Questions about whether grief was interfering with parenting. I laughed when the caseworker asked how old my son was. Then I cried. The investigation was closed in 48 hours, clean, documented, another failed angle. That night, my sister emailed me from an address I didn't recognize. I didn't mean for this to happen. They're out of control. Please call me. I didn't respond. An hour later, another message came in. They're blaming you for everything. Dad's talking about court again, about suing for defamation. Pierce smiled when I told him. Let them, he said. Discovery would finish them. The next morning, the block number called. I answered this time. My father's voice came through, stripped of anger, thin, almost desperate. You think you won, he said. But you took something from us. You don't get to walk away clean. I already did, I said. There was breathing on the line, then, quietly, check your mailbox. The call ended. Inside was a single envelope. No threats, no accusations. Just a photocopy of a document I recognized immediately. Evan's birth certificate, with handwritten notes in the margin, names circled, arrows, dates, and one word underlined twice, inheritance. The notes were my mother's handwriting. I knew it instantly, the tight loops, the heavy downstrokes. She'd written grocery lists like that my entire childhood. She'd written my name like that on birthday cards that always felt conditional. Seeing it on my son's birth certificate made my skin crawl. They'd circled Evan's full name, my name, David's. Arrows pointing toward margins filled with dates. Wedding date, David's death, Evan's death. A timeline, not grief, strategy. I drove straight to Pierce's office. This is stalking, he said after one look, and it's evidence. Of what? Of fixation, of escalation, of intent to harass after legal resolution. I stared at the paper. They're not trying to get the money anymore. No, he agreed. They're trying to punish you for keeping it from them. We filed a harassment complaint that afternoon. Not dramatic, not emotional, clean, methodical. Paperwork stacked against paper. That night, Lena showed up at my door. I didn't invite her in. She looked wrecked, no makeup. Hair pulled back like she hadn't bothered to look at herself in a mirror. She kept wringing her hands like she was cold. They're spiraling, she said. Dad's drinking. Mom barely sleeps. They keep talking about how unfair it is, about how you owe them. I don't owe them anything, I said. She nodded too fast. I know that now. Silence stretched between us. I could hear my refrigerator humming, the house settling. They want to contest Evan's paternity, she said suddenly. The words didn't register at first. What? They think if they can prove David wasn't his biological father, they can argue the trust was invalid from the start. I laughed. A short, sharp sound. That's insane. I told them that, she said. They don't care. Pierce confirmed it the next day. A filing attempt, weak, desperate, dead on arrival. David had signed the birth certificate. DNA tests already existed. The trust language was airtight, but the attempt mattered. It showed motive. It showed malice. It showed they were willing to drag my son's name through anything if it meant hurting me. The restraining order came faster than I expected. No contact, no third parties, no messages, no investigations, no letters. The investigator disappeared. The sedan never came back. Weeks passed without noise. That was when the quiet finally hit. Not relief, something heavier. The absence of constant defense. The space where adrenaline had been. Grief rushed in to fill it. One afternoon, I opened Evan's bedroom for the first time. The air was stale, his bed still unmade. The dinosaur backpack hung on the chair exactly where he'd dropped it after school. I sat on the floor and let it happen. The sobbing, the shaking, the sound I'd been holding back for months. No one interrupted, no phone buzzed, no knock came. For the first time since the funeral, I was alone in the way grief requires. Later, I received a single message forwarded by Pierce. From my mother's lawyer. My clients wish to formally disengage from further action. They request privacy. I deleted it. On the anniversary, I went back to the cemetery. I brought fresh flowers. I told Evan about the fund, about the kids it was helping, about how his name meant something good now, not something fought over. I stayed longer than last time. As I walked away, my phone stayed silent. No unknown numbers, no threats, no plans, just quiet. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something waiting to break. It felt earned. The quiet didn't last. It never does. 2 months after the restraining order, Pierce called me late in the evening. Not panicked, careful. That was worse. They're not contacting you directly, he said. They're contacting other people. Who? Anyone who ever knew Evan, teachers, parents from his school, your old clients. My stomach tightened. They're telling a story, he continued. That you're unstable, that the court silenced them, that you're hiding money meant for family. They're planting doubt. I pictured it instantly, my mother's wounded voice, my father's righteous anger, the implication that I'd done something unnatural, unforgivable. They can't touch the trust, I said. No, Pierce agreed, but they can poison the ground around you. The first sign came a week later. A longtime client emailed to say she was going in another direction. Another stopped returning calls. A PTA mom crossed the street when she saw me coming. Then Child Protective Services called again. Different caseworker, same concern. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It was formal. They said a family member had provided documentation suggesting prolonged emotional instability and financial obsession tied to the deceased child. My hands went cold. They're using Evan, I said. Yes, Pierce replied, and this is the angle we've been waiting for. The investigation wasn't as clean this time. Interviews, home visits, questions designed to provoke reactions. I answered everything calmly. I showed records, therapy notes, school files, the fund paperwork. Still, the caseworker lingered. You don't seem angry, she said once, watching me too closely. Most parents would be. I looked at Evan's photo on the shelf, his crooked grin, missing tooth. I was, I said. I'm not anymore. She wrote something down. That night, Lena called from a blocked number. I shouldn't, she whispered. But they're not done. Mom thinks if they destroy your reputation, the court will reopen everything. She says judges hate controversy. I closed my eyes. What else? I asked. There was a pause. Then, they found someone willing to swear that Evan wasn't David's. The room seemed to tilt. A man from before you met David, she continued quickly. Someone from your college years. They offered him money. That's a lie, I said. I know, she said. But they don't need it to be true, just loud. Pierce didn't hesitate when I told him. Then we stop playing defense, he said, and we end this. The next morning, he filed a motion I hadn't known was possible. A petition to expose malicious litigation abuse. If granted, it wouldn't just shut them up. It would put everything they'd done under oath, on record, public. They'll fight it, I said. Yes, Pierce replied, because if they don't, they lose quietly, and your parents don't do quiet. That evening, a courier knocked on my door. Certified delivery. Inside was a court notice. Hearing scheduled. All parties required to attend. I read the last line twice. Failure to appear will be interpreted as admission. My phone buzzed as if on cue. A message from my mother. If you go through with this, you'll regret it. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt certainty. Because I knew something she didn't. This time, they wouldn't be telling the story. I would. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. My parents arrived early. I saw them through the glass doors of the courthouse. My father pacing, my mother sitting rigid with her hands folded like she was waiting for church to start. Lena stood apart from them, eyes on the floor. They didn't look at me when I walked in. They didn't need to. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. It was about survival. Inside the courtroom, everything was public. That was the point. Pierce laid it out slowly, methodically, like dismantling a machine in front of an audience. The forged email, the pressure campaign, the neighbors paid for statements, the private investigator, the CPS reports, the attempt to challenge my son's paternity. Each item entered into the record like a nail driven cleanly into wood. My mother tried to interrupt twice. The judge shut her down without raising her voice. Then Pierce did something I hadn't expected. He called Lena to the stand. She hesitated before standing, hands shaking as she was sworn in. She didn't look at me. She looked straight ahead. He asked her one question. When did your parents first discuss the trust with you? She swallowed. Before Evan died. The courtroom shifted. How long before? About 6 months. Murmurs rippled through the benches. Pierce nodded once. And when they asked you to forge the email? Her voice broke. They said it was the only way, that Claire wouldn't listen otherwise. My mother stood up. This is a lie, she said, loud and sharp. She's confused. She's always been weak. The judge didn't even look at her. When my mother was finally allowed to speak, what came out wasn't denial. It was justification. She talked about humiliation, about being made to feel small, about how money had always been used against them, about how I'd changed when I married into a family with means. She never mentioned Evan, not once. When the judge asked her directly why she missed her grandson's funeral, my mother opened her mouth and had no answer. The ruling came down an hour later. Malicious litigation abuse, harassment, coercion. The court ordered a permanent no-contact order, financial penalties, and referred the case for further review. Any future attempt to involve me or my son's estate would trigger automatic sanctions. My parents left without looking back. Lena hesitated in the aisle, then turned to me. I'm sorry, she said. I really am. I believed her. It didn't change anything. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, like something had finally stopped pressing down on my chest. Pierce shook my hand. "This is over," he said. I nodded. But as I walked to my car, I noticed something waiting under the windshield wiper. A single folded piece of paper. No envelope. Just one sentence, written in my mother's handwriting. "You'll regret choosing them over us." I stared at it for a long time, then I tore it in half, and for the first time, I knew exactly what came next. The retaliation never came the way she promised. No lawsuit, no public accusation, no dramatic collapse. It came quietly. A month after the hearing, my landlord called, said he'd received a complaint, claimed I was running a business from the apartment that violated zoning. 2 days later, my health insurance flagged my account for review. Then a charity I volunteered with emailed to say my name had been brought up and they needed distance. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Pierce traced it fast. Same pattern, different targets, all indirect, all technically legal, all designed to exhaust me until I slipped. "They're trying to make your life smaller," he said. "If they can't take the money, they'll take the space around you." So I stopped waiting. I moved, not far, not dramatically, just enough. New apartment, new number, new client list. I folded my life inward and chose carefully who stayed inside it. I didn't announce it, I didn't warn anyone. And then, one morning, Lena showed up again. Not at my door, at Pierce's office. She asked for protection. My parents had turned on her. They blamed her testimony, her weakness, her failure to hold the line. They cut her off financially, threatened to expose things from her marriage, things she'd trusted them with. "She says they're spiraling," Pierce told me later, "and she's scared." I sat with that longer than I expected. In the end, I agreed to one condition. Everything she said would be recorded. When I finally met her, she looked smaller than I remembered, like she'd been hollowed out. "They talk about you constantly," she said, "about how you destroyed them, about how they'll never forgive you." "Do they talk about Evan?" I asked. She shook her head. "No." That was all I needed to know. 2 weeks later, my mother tried one last move. She contacted the fund, posed as a donor, asked for a meeting. Pierce forwarded the request without comment. I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote back myself. No meeting, no response, just a single sentence. "Please direct all future correspondence through legal counsel." She never replied. Months passed, then a year. On the 2nd anniversary, I went back to the cemetery. I didn't bring flowers this time, just sat on the cold grass and talked, about the kids the fund helped, about the quiet, about how safe everything finally felt. When I stood to leave, there was no note, no message, no shadow waiting by my car, just wind, just space, just the truth settling where rage used to live. I didn't win, I survived, and that was enough. The last thing I heard about my parents came from Lena. She called once, just once. "They sold the house," she said, "the one they never bought. Dad took an early retirement, Mom stopped going to church." I waited. "They don't talk about you anymore," she added. "They talk about betrayal, about how the world changed, about how people don't respect family." "Do they talk about Evan?" I asked. Silence answered for her. That was the end of it. A year later, the fund crossed its first milestone. 10 kids, 10 families, tuition paid, therapy covered. Quiet help, no ceremonies. Evan's name printed small, the way he liked things. I didn't tell anyone where the money came from. I didn't need to. On a gray morning in March, I received one final piece of mail, forwarded by Pierce. No threats, no handwriting, a notice. My parents had withdrawn all pending actions and signed a binding agreement barring any future claims, public statements, or third-party contact related to me, my son, or the trust. In exchange, the court had sealed the record. They didn't want the story told. I smiled when I read that, because it already was, just not the way they wanted. I went back to the cemetery that afternoon. The ground was softer this time, spring trying to exist. I knelt, brushed dirt from the stone, and told Evan the truth, that some people see love as leverage, that some people mistake grief for weakness, that I didn't. I told him I learned the difference between family and proximity, between blood and loyalty, between silence and surrender. When I stood up, there was no weight in my chest, no anger waiting to flare, just space. They thought they were entitled to what survived him. They were wrong. The only thing they ever had access to was me, and I finally closed the door. I thought that would be the end. But endings don't announce themselves. They fade in quietly, the way pain does when it finally loosens its grip. 6 months later, I was clearing out old files when I found Evan's handwriting tucked into a notebook. Misspelled words, crooked letters, a list titled "When I'm Big," "Pilot," "Game Designer," "Dad Again." I sat on the floor and laughed through tears I didn't fight anymore. The fund kept growing, not fast, steady. Families wrote letters sometimes. Thank you notes from kids who didn't know my son, only his name. That was enough, more than enough. Lena moved out of state. We don't talk much. When we do, it's careful, honest, limited. That's what peace looks like sometimes. My parents never reached out again. No letters, no threats, no apologies, just absence. And absence, I learned, can be a gift. On Evan's birthday, I drove to the coast, sat on a bench overlooking the water and watched the waves come in without asking permission. I told him about the life I was building. Quiet, solid, mine. I told him I wasn't angry anymore, that I didn't need justice to scream to feel real. I just needed the truth to stand. They thought grief made me weak. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought blood was leverage. They were wrong. Grief made me precise. Silence made me patient. And blood? Blood turned out to mean nothing at all. What mattered was who showed up. And in the end, I did.